And then you find yourself right back on A again. And that's an octave higher than this other A down here that we originally started on down there. See, they're in the same place, just to the right of center in the group of 3 black keys. And how many notes are in between? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then the 13th note, and then you can go another octave, and those alphabet letters and sharps and flats would just go again up into another octave like that and higher and lower than that. We're going to be talking about all this stuff more as we go on. So there is your musical alphabet there. You've got to make sure once and for all you get this down. They are 12 notes, and they're all a half step apart from one another. As you go through them in a sequence, they're always a half step apart. B and C and E and F are not the same distance apart that, for example, F and G and A are. Those are whole steps. G and A are a whole step apart because you've got that other note in between. But E and F and B and C are only a half step apart. You've got to memorize your musical alphabet. The best way to do that, I guess, at least initially, would be to remember that they all have sharps and flats in between them, except B and C and E and F. So you sit there and you go B, C, E, F, B, C, E, F, B, C, E, F. Do that a few times. Those are the places where there's no sharps and flats. You'll have your whole musical alphabet down. So, there. Remember, now what we're talking about is the 4 ways to know your pitch patterns. And the first way you have to know any word in any language is you have to have it in your head. You've got to be able to think in the language. You've got to understand your pitch patterns as concepts. That's the whole music theory stuff. And in order to do that, you got to make sure you know the alphabet first. Now, doesn't that make sense? And a lot of this program, we're going to be talking about music theory. Don't worry about it. It's fascinating. Music theory is fascinating if it's presented the right way. It's not the least bit boring. Remember, there's 4 ways to know each pitch pattern, though, and that's only the first way. The first way you have to know any word in any language is you have to be able to think it, right? Now, let's go on to number 2. What's the second way that you need to know any word in any language? Well, the answer is you have to be able to recognize it when you see it represented by graphic symbols on a piece of paper. In other words, the second way that you have to know any word in any language is you have to be able to read it. You have to be able to read in the language. You know, now not everybody knows how to read in the English language, do they? But it's an awfully tough way to conduct yourself in society if you don't know how to read. Some people can do it, but it's certainly not the best way to go about it. In any language, you've got to know how to read. So if we put this in a musical context, the second way you need to know your scales and your chords and all your pitch patterns and stuff is you need to understand them as notation. You might also recall that notation is one of the 6 main areas of music, isn't it, that we talked about last week. Pitch, rhythm, timbre, dynamics, technique, and notation. You've got to know on some level how to read music. How are you going to learn those songs you want to play from the songbook if you don't know at least something about how to read music? Now, later on in the program, I believe it's lessons 9 and 10, we're going to be showing you about learning about reading music. There are several different styles of notation that we use for the guitar. There's standard notation, which many of you have come across before if you've taken other music lessons. You also know something about tablature, some of you who have already played for a while and stuff like that. Also, there's those little chord boxes and things like that. That, you know, that you've seen where they put the little dots, you know, there to show you where to actually put your fingers. Many of you have seen these different styles of notation. So we are not going to really talk about reading music in this particular thing because I got so little time here, and we've got to go on to number 3 here because this is actually the big one. But on some level, you may know that a lot of rock and roll players do not know how to read standard notation on the guitar. And so we're not going to force you to learn how to read standard notation in this program. But certainly if you ever want to be one of the world's great guitar players, or if you want to play jazz or classical music, you've got to learn how to read standard notation. For the rest of us, maybe tablature might be good enough, and we'll be putting that more in perspective later on. But anyway, the second way that you need to know any word in any language is you have to recognize it when you see it on paper. You have to be able to read, at least on some level in the language. Now, on to number 3 down here. This is the big one, and this, I swear, I think this is the most important stuff you're ever going to learn from anybody on the subject of music right here. I hope they carve this on my tombstone. If I can get people to understand this, I feel like I've done my job. You got to think think in the language, you got to read in the language. But isn't it true? Wouldn't you say that the most important way that you know any word in any language is you recognize it when you hear it? You know what it sounds like. Third, and probably most importantly, you need to be able to hear in the language. You need to be able to recognize what your different words sound like. You can do exactly the same thing in music. The third way, I mean, music is an audio art form, isn't it? Isn't the most important thing about it how it sounds? You know what I mean? So, we put this in a musical context. The third way that you need to know your chords and your scales and your intervals is you need to know what they sound like. You need to know them as patterns of real sound. This, of course, is the whole world of playing by ear. And everybody wants to play by ear, don't they? We all have friends that claim to play by ear and stuff like that. But what you're going to find out is there's two different ways to play by ear. There's a smart way to play by ear, and there's a not so smart way to play by ear. And most of the people that you've ever met who play by ear the not so smart way. And I'll show you what that is. You walk up to this guy and he's playing this Pearl Jam song off the radio, and you go, wow, that's that Pearl Jam song off the radio. How did you learn that? And he goes, I figured it out by ear. And wow, we're impressed. You figured that out by ear? Wow. But there's a few things that guy isn't telling you. First of all, he's not telling you how long it took him to figure it out. Now, for example, it might have taken him hours or days or weeks to figure out that Pearl Jam song by ear. Because the way a lot of people play by ear is they kind of stumble around, kind of trial and error on their instrument. And some people can actually get to a point where they can do that fairly well and figure out some reasonably complicated stuff. But the way most people play by ear is they just sort of stumble around on the instrument and hope for the best. And it might take them hours to figure out Pearl Jam. I usually know how to play the whole song by the time the song's over. 3 minutes, 5 minutes, I can figure out a Pearl Jam song. Might have taken this guy 5 hours or 5 days. So, the first thing that guy's not telling you is how long it took him to figure out by ear. The second thing he's not telling you is he tried to figure out 10 other songs this week, and he didn't get anywhere with the other 10. He's playing you that Pearl Jam song because that's the only one he had any success with. There were 10 other songs that they were just too hard. He couldn't get a grasp. He couldn't figure out how they worked. And the third thing he's not telling you is there's a list of about 500 other songs that he'd like to be able to play, that he'd like to be able to figure out by ear, but he wouldn't even try because he just knows he couldn't do it. Wouldn't even try. They're too complicated. Yeah, maybe he can figure out Pearl Jam, but can he figure out more complicated bands like Fish or like Dave Matthews or like Steely Dan or like Primus or King Crimson? You know, it's easy to figure out certain styles of music, but more complex styles of music, a lot of people could never begin to play by ear if they play by ear that not-so-smart way. So, how would you like to be able to figure out anything just by listening to it a few times? Wouldn't that be cool? Well, in order to do that, you've got to learn to play by ear the smart way.
Hi, I'm Scotty West, creator of the Absolutely Understand Guitar Video Home Study Program. Hey, thanks for all the positive feedback on our video guitar lessons. We're now uploading new lessons right from our DVD Home Study Program. Each lesson is 70 minutes long, but we've chopped them up into 10-minute chapters to fit on YouTube, so each lesson will have 7 chapters. It's critical that you watch these chapters in order. Make sure you start with Lesson 1, Chapter 1, then move to Lesson 1, Chapter 2, etc. When you've finished all the chapters for Lesson 1, then move on to Lesson 2. Hey, some of this stuff you might already know, and some of it's a little dry. You're going to wonder, do I really need to know this stuff? The answer is yes. Each one of these chapters contains little gems of information that nobody's told you yet, and these are the missing pieces that are preventing you from seeing the big picture. Don't cheat yourself out of these valuable realizations. Stick with the program. Also, consider our complete DVD home study program. Our high-resolution DVD video is much better than these fuzzy little YouTube clips, and you'll also get all our cool printed material too. So good luck with your music and enjoy the lessons.